The middleman who's fallen on his sword.
Good morning.
The then Prime Minister who needed cash.
Did Mr. Sharp help you with your loan?
And the institution whose reputation it all risked.
The chairman of the BBC, Richard Sharp, resigns.
3 months ago, it was revealed Richard Sharp tried to secure a high-level government meeting for a businessman offering Boris Johnson financial help. A meeting he did not fully disclose when applying to be chairman of the BBC. Today, he took no questions, just gave this statement.
I feel that this matter may well be a distraction from the corporation's good work were I to remain in post until the end of my term. I have, therefore, this morning, resigned as the BBC chair to the Secretary of State and to the board.
But this was a decision Richard Sharp was forced into, say insiders. A report released today says Mr. Sharp breached the rules of public appointments twice. Firstly, by telling Boris Johnson he wished to apply for the role before he made his application.
Did you offer anything to Mr. Sharp in exchange for your loan support?
Secondly, by assisting Mr. Johnson with a, quote, private financial matter. The report says there is a risk of a perception that Mr. Sharp was recommended for appointment because he assisted the former Prime Minister in a private financial matter. Months of turmoil at the BBC could have been saved, say the Liberal Democrats, if the current Prime Minister took action long before today.
Rishi Sunak should have shown leadership and reversed Boris Johnson's decision and sacked Mr. Sharp. And I think now it's for the Conservatives to explain and to apologise.
Rishi Sunak says it was right that Mr. Sharp's actions were investigated fully. But one question he did not want to answer: should the chair of the BBC be appointed by the Prime Minister?
Should his replacement be a non-political appointment? And are you sick and tired of clearing up Boris Johnson's mess?
You know, what I'm doing is focus on delivering for the British people. That's what I'm here talking about today in Scotland.
Should the next person not be a non-political appointment?
As I said, right now I'm focused on talking to the people here in Scotland about what we're doing to deliver for them. Most of all, the cost of living.
That's not the answer to my question, Prime Minister.
Well,
should the next person be a non-political appointment?
We're jumping ahead of it. There's an established appointments process for all these things, and it will be right that we turn to that when the time is right. But right now I'm here talking to the people in Scotland about what we're doing to deliver for them.
There is anger behind these glass walls. BBC staff outraged by the potential politicisation of an institution that holds impartiality at its core.
Morale has been dreadful. We want that to change, and for that to change, for morale to improve and journalists and the wider BBC staff to have faith in their leadership, this needs to be an appointment process that is fair, that is transparent, that has integrity, and that is done in a proper manner, free of political taint.
This has been an uncomfortable process for the BBC, revealing deep divisions between those at the top running the place and those on the shop floor. What's hoped by many people in that building is that a swift resignation today will draw a line under this episode. But one thing still remains. Richard Sharp resigned after not revealing his part, however small, in organising a guarantor for an £800,000 loan to the then Prime Minister. What we still do not know, what Boris Johnson has not yet answered, is who provided the actual loan of hundreds of thousands of pounds and what was it for? Who effectively was bankrolling the lifestyle of a sitting Prime Minister?
There will be a debate, I think, about whether Boris Johnson should have recused himself from the decision, given what he knew about what Richard Sharp was doing to help him. And I think that's an unanswered question. And there are unanswered questions about the loan itself. Who actually made the loan? We don't know. I'm not sure we'll get answers to those questions, but they're certainly lying around on the table.
Mr. Sharp will remain in post until June. The hunt for a replacement has begun.
Well, the Shadow Culture Secretary, Lucy Powell, joins us now from Manchester. You said this whole affair has done untold damage to the BBC's reputation and its independence. How do you think that has manifested itself in the BBC's output? Do you think Richard Sharp had an undue influence on the BBC's output?
Well, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the public reputation, the fact that the BBC, because of this story, has been hitting the headlines about these issues for weeks and weeks and weeks, and that the chairman himself was absent without leave, seemingly, during a time of particular crisis for the BBC during the Gary Lineker affair. I think that it's pretty self-evident, to be honest, that this whole affair and the fact that it's gone on for weeks and weeks has caused untold damage to the reputation of the BBC, and that now needs to be put right. So today's resignation will help to begin that process, but we must, as your report was saying, we must now look ahead to the appointment of his successor and make sure that that process isn't mired in the same mess that the last one was.
The man he did tell was the top civil servant, Simon Case. Do you think he has got this wrong, that he should have done more to stop this whole thing happening? Do you have confidence in him?
Well, look, this findings today was looking at quite a narrow point, and in fact, I think it's just worth noting that this inquiry was happening because I asked for it after the revelations in the Sunday Times. It wasn't happening because the Prime Minister took a leadership role and wanted it to happen. Well, this report hasn't looked into those issues, and I don't know of the nature of those conversations, but what I do know is that it is the responsibility of a prospective candidate to fully disclose any conflicts of interest, and they weren't done in this case. And the reason that that rule exists is because should any of those interests then come to light at a later stage, they are likely to damage the reputation of the organisation that you're seeking appointment to, and that is exactly what has happened in this case. So I think, you know, Richard Sharp's comments today, the Prime Minister's comments today, that somehow this is a sort of technical breach and we can just carry on as business as usual, you really are tone deaf to what actually has happened here and what damage has been caused.
Yet Labour will not commit to depoliticise public appointments. I mean, I've asked you before, will you promise that Labour wouldn't appoint a BBC chairman who was a Labour donor or a Labour crony? And you've been unable to say, yes, I make that promise.
Well, that's not actually the case.
Well, will you make
know,
that pledge now?
I have appointed... OK, let me just finish the point. I have appointed an independent review panel to look at all the issues around how we can make the BBC more independent, how we can ensure its future in the digital age and all of those issues, very much looking at the appointments process, not just of the chair, but of the board. That review panel had its first meeting just this week, in fact, and the eminent and experienced members of it have some very forthright and strong opinions about these matters, and I will take their recommendations fully on board.
But it's way beyond the BBC, isn't it?
The issue here is not just...
I mean, public appointments
the issue here is not actually just the end of the process.
Yeah,
they do.
I get that.
And we've had a real problem. We've had a real problem with the cronyism at the heart of this Conservative government in terms of their public appointments. And it's not just who signs off at the end of a process, who is actually being appointed, but this whole process with Richard Sharp's appointment and other appointments, quite frankly, stank. Because what happened was we had a patsy so-called independent panel put forward. We had names floated in the media to clear the field of anybody else. The Prime Minister clearly had a preferred candidate. The panel, the independent panel, used to, in Labour's time, used to actually recommend someone to be appointed. Now they simply just say, are all this whole list of candidates appointable? And then it's for the Prime Minister and the Culture Secretary to pick whichever one. Okay. So there are a lot of issues in the whole process, rather than just, who at the end of the line actually signs off the appointment.